The following is an interview with someone who teaches, well, exactly opposite of what I teach how to do with podcasts. And the story behind this goes, we got an email from someone wanting to be on the show. And when I saw his request, I was like, you know what? This is hilarious because he teaches exactly opposite of what I teach and is basically looking to steal my customers. And so I thought, I'm going to have him on. I think that'd be hilarious. And we actually got on the interview. It was fantastic. It went much, much better than I thought. And I learned a tremendous amount about his podcasting methods and how he uses it. And we went through and kind of discussed the differences and the similarities behind what we do and came down to the core difference and how we're essentially using podcasts to do two completely different things, both yielding in sales and results. And so this is a fascinating interview. We had a great time. And if you are looking for the different ways that you can use a podcast, the different ways to get clients from a podcast, you will really enjoy this episode. So without further ado, let's dive into this interview with Kevin. Welcome back, everybody, to the Golden Mic. My name is Josh Forti, and today, let's see, we have an interesting guest on. And I have no idea where this conversation is going to go because we kind of do the same thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. It just sounds like it. But we have someone that reached out asking, hey, can we sit down and have a conversation about building a business with a podcast? And I'm like, you know what? That sounds interesting since that's what I do. And that's what we talk about here. But as always, with the purpose with the Golden Mic is to build relationships, ask questions, and ultimately figure out what it means to be successful in life. And so today I'm excited to bring on Mr. Kevin. I apologize, Kevin. Remind me of your last name again.
Chemidlin, all good.
Chemidlin.
Trips everybody up.
Yeah. All right. Kevin Chemidlin. He is a podcast coach and a podcast host. He has done over $2.5 million in revenue from his own show and helped over 400 people with their podcasts either launch, scale, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. So Kevin, welcome, and I'm excited to have you.
Josh, so pumped to be here. So obviously I've got my own show as well. And what I found is that some of the most fun episodes are the ones where I bring on my fellow podcast pundits. And we can just trade notes. Some people say competition. I'm like, yo, rising tide raises all boats. And I've heard from my audience that it's their favorite conversations as well. So hopefully we can live up to that.
Yeah, typically speaking, I feel like we've done a lot of podcasts, so we know how they should flow and what makes a good podcast, right?
Exactly.
Right? You interview people that have never been interviewed before, and it's like, all right, we're pulling some teeth here. We're gonna get the flow down. Give me a little background. Give me the 60-second to 2-minute long, like just how we got here, who you are, where you're at, and we'll dive into your story and stuff as well. But help me understand who you are.
Yeah. So I graduated college in 2014 with a software degree. Got a job at a big health insurance company, great, cushy, 6-figure. It was awesome. Until it wasn't super passionate about software or insurance, really. And so I spent 4 years doing all kinds of side hustles until eventually I launched a podcast about my hometown. And what's funny is I told myself that would be the side hustle that I didn't try to like make my thing. But super passionate about my hometown, which is Philadelphia. Launched a show interviewing successful Philadelphians, kind of like How I Built This with Guy Raz. If you ever heard that show. Yep. And did really well with it. Found out I was a way better podcaster than I was a software developer for about 1.5 years. I mean, I went through some crazy trial and tribulations, did what everybody does when they launched and it didn't work. But I had already left the job totally prematurely, told everyone in my life I was this badass podcast entrepreneur. Things weren't going well. Almost quit, but decided not to. Spent a bunch of time studying, listening to every single show on the top 100 charts, took some courses, read some books. Was eventually able to take that show past 100,000 downloads in a year and $100,000 monetized. It did about $122K in 2019. Then COVID hit 2020. That show went on pause because all my great Philadelphians that I was scheduled to interview had to stop and deal with COVID. And so I spent 3 months.
Was this an in-person show or was it online?
It was totally in person. It was
interesting.
I was against online at that point in time, which obviously COVID changed that. So show went up because I was like, we got to do it in person. So let's just wait the 2 weeks until this thing passes. Right.
Which is what it should have been, but that's another conversation.
Right. So, then after a couple months, I found myself just talking with other podcasters, a bunch of them reaching out, asking how I did what I did with Philly Who. And after like the 30th or 40th Zoom call where I was saying, do this, do that, do this, do that. I was like, I think I'm, there's a need for this, learning how to grow an audience, how to, monetize a show. And so that was 2020, and I launched Grow the Show, and life has been a whirlwind since then. It's been 4 years. It's an accelerator program. It's a podcast. Like I said, like you said, we've had 400 clients come through the program. The show has reached, several tens of thousands. And so that's all I do now, man. Literally all I do day and night is help people grow their shows.
Amazing. And how did you find us?
Yeah. So I can walk you through basically my algorithm for discovering podcasts to collaborate with.
Okay, so it was that it was like a reach out process.
Through my process.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So like, we have no other connection outside of that. Like, I don't follow you, you don't follow me, right?
No, correct. What's funny though is I after getting in touch with you and you booking me on the show, I started seeing your ads and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna talk to that guy. so
Which is funny,
yeah,
because I just started running, like, my entire life. I have never run an ad. That was kind of my claim to fame, right? We did about 7 million followers on social media, without ever running an ad, and built my first podcast, Think Different Theory, to about 1.5 million downloads, all without ads, right? And then only recently have we, I don't even want to say started. We are attempting to play with, right?
Testing.
Like, I don't get that world. I do not understand the paid world, right? I am an organic person, through and through. But been working with a couple people that are like, you gotta try it. And so it's like that. All right, I'm doing this because you're telling me to, but we're playing with that. But that's cool. Okay, so some context then. Help me understand. So little background on me, just really, really briefly in a nutshell. Born on a farm, born in Wisconsin, moved to LA, grew up there for 10 years, then moved to a farm and spent the remaining 10 or 11 years at home there. Got an entrepreneurship, fail, the whole deal, right?
Yep.
Hit it big,
Standard.
hit it big in the social media world, right? Instagram,
Awesome.
kind of a right place, right time. Blew up, 7 million followers, grown and managed for clients. Then one thing led to another, trial, tribulation, brother passing away, some things like that. I got into podcasting, and Think Different Theory was the name of the podcast we grew. And we got big enough to where Apple actually came at us with a lawsuit for trademark infringement on the Think Different. So we actually had to shut down because of that. And I mean, we did a rebrand, but it was, kind of at that point where I'm like, okay, maybe I should figure out how to make some money, and not just build a big show, right? Because I was making okay money, but nothing crazy, right? Totally. And that's when I feel like I became an entrepreneur. And so for me, there is a very specific reason that I believe in podcasting and why I believe in the model and the method of that. I'm curious for you, why podcasting? Why is it, do you believe, is the right model? Where do you believe is the opportunity? Kind of help me understand that.
Yeah. So this is how I felt in 2018, and it's only gotten crazier since then. I feel like every other medium is just, it's a bloodbath on how to make stuff shorter and punchier and more ridiculous, and just like grab attention, make it short, like short form video. It's how can we take this 10-second video, make it 6. So I feel like podcasting is the only medium that through and through, people, even when they're just giving you a try, will give you 20, 30, 40, 60, even more, over an hour of their time. And you just can't get into nuance in a shorter time period, right? Like, we would never be able to have this depth of a conversation that we're about to have. The people hearing our voices would never get to know you and me the way they're going to know us at the end of this conversation. And so, like I said, in a world that's just getting flashier and more just headline clickbait driven, I'm like, this is the only thing that we have to really learn, to connect, to have debate in a way that's, again, nuanced. You can dive deep into stuff. And so I've always been, because of that, that's always been my favorite medium to consume. I'm not interested in watching a bunch of like 10-second videos.
Okay.
I learn more from it. Like I said, get to know the creators more. And so that's how I started making them, because I was like, I want to hear, literally, when I started the Philly show, I was like, I want to learn about successful Philadelphians in the way that I'm learning about these famous people and how I built this. I was like, I want to hear their story, 60 minutes. I want to hear their background. I want to hear their trials and tribulations, and how they did it in this hometown, because Philly's got all kinds of little brother syndrome. And I'm like, no, this is an awesome town. Now, ironically, I now live in Miami. We can talk about that if you want. But, that's what brought me to podcasting. And then it's, like I said, in the years since, it's just so, like, that's just magnified so much, because TikTok short form video didn't exist back in 2018. And I felt that then. So now it's even more so. And so now I'm even more passionate about the medium.
It's interesting. Like, I love creating podcasts, and I love interviews, right? I actually don't listen to podcasts,
Really?
like almost at all. Like
Yeah.
the only two podcasts that I have probably listened to in the past year, with the exception of, my mom sends me some, religious or philosophical piece that, I listen to so we can have a conversation about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than that, it has been Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman. And I would say Joe Rogan just because I learned so much from how he asks questions and has conversations, right? And because I like the people he interviews. And Lex Friedman strictly and solely because he interviewed Zuckerberg and Bezos, right?
Yeah.
Right, and Elon, right? And that's about it. And so it's interesting for me, like the way that I have viewed podcasts has been like if I'm going to listen to a conversation, I want to feel like I'm buying into the identity of the person, right?
Yep.
Much more than I am the actual form of like if Joe Rogan was doing, I don't know, YouTube videos, right? Instead, like I'd probably go watch him there too, right? Because I'm buying into the person. And so I feel like from an identity piece or from a marketing, a sales, a business perspective, I feel like podcasting, yes, to everything that you said as far as like
Sure.
really
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
to know, but podcast gives you the ability to build an identity and to build a representation of a person like you that people want to buy into. And like, it's almost like I listen to podcasts not because of their podcast, but rather because I want to see the world through that person's lens.
Yep.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Totally. I think a couple things I'll highlight there is, Joe Rogan wouldn't be Joe Rogan if he didn't have his, four
For
hour
sure.
long, those deep
For sure.
conversations. Like you said, you love him because the questions that he asks. So totally with you on that. And you also highlighted something that's absolutely true. And podcasting has got a lot of quirks. There's a lot of
Yeah.
things that are very different about this medium than all the other ones, right? And one of
Yeah.
them is, um, the fact that like 40% of the population in the US listens to podcasts on a regular basis, and the rest of
Really?
60% do not. And they're not going to start. Now, I would consider you one because you listen to two. And
Yeah.
actually, what I found through a little bit of surveying my listeners and their listeners and some anecdotal data, what I found is that in general, fervent podcast listeners like myself, I listen to one almost every day. I go, for a
Yeah.
walk or whatever it is. It's very routine.
Yeah.
They have usually like 4 to 6 shows on their weekly shelf, and then like up to 10 to 20 shows on their like quarterly shelf. And what I mean
Really?
by that
Okay.
is, yeah, like people cycle in and out of the shows that they listen to. So this is something that I have to coach my clients on all the time, where it's like, look, you can really reasonably expect 10 to 20% of your audience. And I've heard another creator say it's 12%, but I say 10 to 20 because it varies. 10
Yeah.
to 10 to 20% of your overall audience that knows about your podcast and loves it would say, "Oh yeah, I love that
Yeah.
show."
Yeah.
Actually listen on a regular basis because
Yeah.
people cycle in and out because there's only, the good thing about podcasting is you can go for 60 minutes. The bad thing is that means you only have so much shelf space, right? For shows that
Right.
you can listen to on a regular basis. So that's another reason why, a podcast listener is the hardest fought audience member. Like
Yeah.
it's so difficult, but once you have them, it's really valuable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I think that perhaps the reason that I don't listen to as many podcasts as potentially other people do, right? And I obviously
Yeah.
have one. I hope people listen, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
is like I'm big in investing in coaches, right? So like I've spent about $400,000 of my own money on coaches in some capacity
Yep.
in over the course of my life, right? So like when I am gonna go and learn from someone, I'm like I'm not there to learn a topic, right? Like I'm there to learn from someone specifically about
Yeah.
a topic, right?
Yep.
And so I found that like I like listening to audiobooks and like things of that nature because I feel like that person has put time and effort into actually structuring something. It's not just kind of this ongoing thing. Once again, with the exception of the caveat of the interview styles where it's the Joe Rogan or the Lex, and they're interviewing people that like I would love to have a conversation with, but I don't have the opportunity to, and I'd
They're hard
listen
to
to them.
reach. Yeah.
Which I think leads me to the question of, okay, so you clearly have a lot of data, right, on this. You've studied this, you've worked with these people, which is fantastic, right? And kudos to you.
Thanks.
Help me understand your model. How do you monetize? What's the game plan? What
Yeah.
do you help people do?
So one thing I want to highlight before I answer that question is,
Yep.
from the reason that what you said, I recommend to most of my clients to do more solo episodes instead of just guest episodes, because what I found is that solo episodes are the ones that have far and beyond the highest completion rates. And completion
Interesting.
rates is, for those who don't know, like you can go on Apple or Spotify and see on average how much of your podcast episodes are people listening to. Far and beyond the episodes of my show that I get the most feedback from, that I get the most sales from, are my solo episodes as compared to when I interview another guest. And the reason behind that is because it's 6 minutes to sometimes 45 minutes of me teaching. It's almost like a little mini audiobook every single time. And what's cool about it is uh, it's not as heavy as an audiobook. Like I can just put out an episode about one little simple thing or maybe tell a story. And so that's why like everybody defaults to the 45-minute interview weekly. And I'm like, look, in order for that to be good, you have to get people that are hard to reach and that are unbelievable folks, which you can do that, like Lex has pulled it off. He's gotten he's caught all the Pokemon, but it's very hard to do. And most people are only able to have kind of okay people to come on their show. And so their podcast is okay, but they have great knowledge, which they're able to deliver in a solo format. So sorry, I totally answered a different question. Remind me of the question you asked me.
It was very good. I think my question is like,
the monetization,
structurally, like monetization, your plan, because I think in our conversation, I think you and I have very different approaches to how we build podcasts. And I don't think one is right or wrong. I think it depends upon what you're trying to do with it, right? I know what I'm trying to do with it. I know what my people are trying to do with it, right? But I'm curious to understand your model, right? Of what's the goal, what's the framework, how we monetize?
Yeah, 100%. So basically, I work with entrepreneurs who have generally an online business and they want their show to be their content marketing engine. And so,
sorry, pause right there for a second. When you say online business, help me understand the world. Is this the Brunson world? Is it the traffic and funnels or traffic and conversion world? Is it Tony Robbins? Like what world?
I'd say all the above. I mean, it's generally folks that either have service-based businesses, online service businesses, so like bookkeeping services, accounting services, whatever, online coaches. That pretty much takes most of them. Occasionally I'll get someone who, like, I've got a client right now that I'm working with that it's construction consulting. They like help with huge projects, stuff like that. So consultants as well.
But the Brunsons and the
100%.
What's his name? Okay, cool.
Yeah. So very, very much like that. And so the model is this: it's a lot of these folks, almost all of them, they have knowledge businesses, right? They have implementation businesses. So whether it's an online coach or a done for you service or a consultant, like it's sharing their knowledge. And so basically what their show is education. And it's the model for my show. So my show is called Grow the Show. The idea is if you are a podcaster, you listen to my show, you're going to learn just by listening to the podcast how to grow and monetize your show. And I hear from folks all the time who have never once, bought any of my stuff. And they're like, oh my gosh, I grew my show this amount. And I'm like, awesome, that's great. Tell 10 friends for me. And then they'll tell one person that buys my high ticket product, right? So boom, it works. So what I like to do is I split 50% guest episodes because, it is worth doing guest episodes, right? We're both here. And then 50% solo episodes. And the idea is your main monetization is converting your listeners to customers. And actually what I tell everyone is, I get the question all the time, how do I monetize my podcast? And I say, horrible question. Why? Because at what moment is your podcast monetized? Like, what does that even mean? Right? Most people say, oh, well, when I make money. I'm like, okay, well, who's paying you the money? And a lot of times people say, oh, my sponsors, right? Because everyone's just like, podcast monetization equals sponsorship. But I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, but who's paying your sponsors then? And they kind of go like, huh. And they're like, I guess my listeners. And I'm like, yes. So what I say is every single way, except probably one, which I think you might do, to monetize a podcast is getting your listeners to buy something, right? Where it's either they're buying your stuff that you sell them, or they're buying the stuff that your sponsors get them to buy, right? So the model that I put forth is, look, far and beyond, dollar per download wise, you're going to make 10 to 100x dollar per download if you sell something directly to your listeners, even more so for the folks that are selling high ticket, coaching and consulting, than if you were to try and build this huge audience and then go convince another business to pay you in advance for them to buy your stuff, which is sponsorship. And so I tell these folks, look, don't even think about sponsorship until later on. Like we can get more juice from the squeeze, get more money from the show later. But really it's what can you make and sell to your listeners who, with this model, are listening to 50% solo, 50% you interviewing a guest. By the sixth episode that they hear, they're just red hot. They're like, all right, let's go. How do we do this? Right. So that's what we built here at Grow the Show.
Gotcha. Okay. And you have data, yes?
Yeah.
On this. So
not as much as I want, but yeah, let's go for it and I'll tell you what I have.
Yeah. Okay. So when you say dollar per download, and when
Yeah.
you are looking at when you're looking at a monetization or a metric of dollars, right? Not when I monetize, but just like what is being made. Help me understand what can one expect? What do you look for with the model? Because we will get into the framework, but just for
Sure.
the sake of conversation, like what is to be expected, right? Or what do you look for with that? Let's say I have what a $5,000 offer.
Sure.
Some of your clients, okay, great. So I have a $5,000 coaching offer. I'm going to launch a show. I've got whatever, maybe 1,000 people on my email list, whatever. Right? I'm going to go launch this show. What am I expecting?
So I'll work backwards. Generally, what we shoot for is that 2 to 7% of your podcast audience buys your stuff. And that includes high ticket. So we'll say 2% on the low end. Or no, let's say 5% in the middle, right? Now, what we said before is 10 to 20% of your audience is going to tune in on a regular basis. So let's say you've got 1,000 folks in your email list. Let's say 20% of those folks tune in. So that's 200 listeners, which totally checks out. Like I've seen tons of folks with that's usually where they launch to. And then 0.05 of that is 10. If your offer's 5K, that's 50K. So that's it, man. And so dollar per download, you're getting 200 download. It's a lot, right?
Interesting.
That's $250 per download, which is insane. Meanwhile, when you get sponsorship via CPM, cost per mil, it's like $25 per 1,000 downloads.
It's ridiculous.
Absurd.
It's ridiculous.
So those numbers actually check out. I mean, when I think of, I'll be honest, I haven't measured my dollars per download in about a year and a half, but
yeah,
in 2022, I did very, very closely, and I was doing 2022. I started the year doing 50K a month. By the end of the year, I was doing 156. And Grow the Show was getting like 2,000 downloads per episode. It wasn't super huge, but it was people who are exactly my target customer, target client, and they were, laid down sales for the high ticket service.
And how much was the offer?
In 2022, it was 7,800.
7,800. Service or coaching?
In 2020, the first half it was coaching. Second half, I added a service component to it. And now it's evolved a ton, but back then it was mainly, I'd say coaching. Now it's mastermind.
Oh, interesting. On podcasts, I assume?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I'm changing the model right now in the middle of the switch, like totally in the middle of growing pains and that type of thing. But I'm going from group coaching, and then it went one-on-one for a while, but that became just too much overhead. Yeah. And so now it's kind of split where it's front-end membership to get access to the information, and then back-end mastermind exclusively 6+ figure entrepreneurs, get them in the group, Slack access, that sort of thing.
That's cool. Do you do anything in person for the mastermind?
I'm going to do my first one this year. Yeah. So we're looking at late May in Miami. Thanks. I've been to so many of them. I'm so excited to throw one of my own. Oh my God. I can't wait.
They're so much fun. They're so much fun. Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah. That's cool. How many, I assume this is like a small, it's a mastermind. So it'd be like a smaller, kind of like
totally
intimate.
Small. I mean, we are just launching the thing, man. So we've got a few early birds in there. And so, it's real small for now.
So, okay. You have a framework, 4 steps you said, right?
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance to go through that because I've got questions.
Sure.
So help me understand. I assume based on this, most of your people that are going to come to you or that you're going to accept into your offer, right, are going to have some form of audience already, even if it's not that big, right?
Yep. So they've already launched their show. Generally, their podcast is already out there.
Okay, so they've already launched their show. And they are coming to you. They've got an offer. They've got a small audience, and they're like, "Hey, we're help me grow." You're like, "Sweet, we got these 4 steps. Where do you help them do? Like, what's the tangible outcome?
Totally.
What are the steps? Like, what's the framework?"
So, tangible outcome is get your podcast to 1,000 downloads, which we're kind of desensitized to numbers, but 1,000 downloads is a lot for for a show. And with these monetization numbers that we're talking about, they've got a back end offer. I'm like, we get your show from 0 to 1,000. You will have gotten past most of the hurdles, and it's way easier to get from 1,000 to 10,000 downloads.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
If somebody, you look at data, right? So I'm gonna. This is fantastic.
Let's go, man. Yeah.
So okay. So if I have launched my show, how many people don't have? Without sounding like a complete arrogant prick, how many people don't get to 1,000 people when they launch their show? Like how long? Like when someone has their show launched, when do they come to you with? 12 episodes, maybe? or what?
Oh my gosh, it's anywhere between 3 episodes and 300 literally. And
And
the
and
vast
typically speaking, how like are they're not at 1,000 downloads yet?
dude, the vast majority of podcasts that are publishing right now, which is only like 300,000 by the way. Everyone's like, "Oh, there's 4 million podcasts."
Yeah.
Almost 4 million of them are dead. There's 300,000
Yeah,
podcasts.
yeah.
Uh
Yeah.
the vast majority of them have between 50 and 250 downloads an episode.
Wow.
And
Oh, per
that's what I
ep
call
oh, you're saying 1,000 downloads per episode.
per episode. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
What
I
are you
thought you
thinking
meant
per
1,000
month?
downloads total, and I'm like,
No. I know.
dude.
I'm like, why is it so surprising?
Yeah,
That's funny.
okay. That makes so much more sense. Okay, great. So 1,000, we got to get you to 1,000 downloads per episode. Got it. Continue.
That is, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, most people come to me, they're 50 to 250, they're in the friends and family zone. They're like, I just launched, I've gotten 200 downloads an episode. Or they're like, I've been doing this for 3 years and I only have 200 downloads per episode. I'm like, that's because right now, the people who are listening to your show are the people who know you personally, because human beings have about 50 to 200 people that are actually in their network, right? That's about where we tap out. So that's what most entrepreneurs who have a show are experiencing. So I call the 4 steps the podcast ladder, and I call it a ladder because you can't skip levels. I've come across people who are really good at level 3, but they are not good at level 2, and so they have the results. They have no results, right? Because they haven't gotten level 2. So level 1 is having a clear, unique premise. And this is where 90% of the people that I help don't realize they are struggling. And what most people do is they launch a show, and in an effort to make the show as appealing as possible to as many people as possible, they make it super broad, right? I want to talk about finance and business and philosophy because I'm a CEO and I'm ready to be Joe Rogan and talk about whatever I want to talk about. And it's like, you can get there, but the first thing that you have to do is get really clear behind 3 things. Number 1, who your show is for specifically. Now, we don't have to overdo this. Every single podcast coach, anybody can call themselves a podcast coach. They all say, we need to niche down. It's like, people are niching down way too much. You don't want to niche down too much, but you still want to be specific who the show is for, what it will do for them, not what you will do. Every entrepreneur is like, I'm like, what's your podcast? And they say, it's me interviewing successful people. I'm like, I don't give a crap about you. What are those interviews going to do for me? What am I going to get out of hearing those interviews every week? And their eyes go up and they're like, And they're like, well, you're going to learn how to read your, I don't know, I'll make something up. I'll do an example of a client I'm working with. You're going to learn how to read your bookkeeping numbers and use those numbers to make great decisions. I'm like, awesome. I need that shit, right? I don't know if I'm cursed. I'm like,
oh no, yeah, yes, fine.
Okay. I'm like, dude, I need that so bad. Now, this particular client, who probably won't mind me sharing this, when she came to me, that's her show. She's like, she owns a service business. It's a bookkeeping business. She has a show. She's like, my show's not growing. What's wrong with it? And I'm like, okay, well, what does your show do for its listeners? What do you want it to do for them? And she said that. She said, I want people to listen to the show, be able to take the bookkeeping information that we give them and use it to make great business decisions. I'm like, cool. So how are you currently talking about the show? She said, it's called Entrepreneur Money Stories, right? When I interview entrepreneurs about their money mindset. I'm like, that is not what you just said, right? Like, that is not what comes across. But that is what most entrepreneurs do. They're like, I'm going to interview people about X. And it's like, yeah, but what's the listener going to get out of it? What are they going to learn? So we really actually didn't have to change her content all that much. We just changed the branding of the show. It went from Entrepreneur Money Stories to Business by the Books. Like, yeah, I would listen to that show, right? If I want to learn that. And usually when we make that change, we already start to see the show growing before we even get into any growth tactics, just because the show is no longer so vague that it just repels people.
And where, typically speaking, are these downloads or are these listeners coming from when you start to see more?
So here's the thing. Most podcasters think that they have a growth problem because they're looking at their download numbers and and every week they have 250. But they're doing growth activities. They're posting on social. They're trying to get the word out. They're even showing up on other shows. But they're like, my audience won't grow. I'm like, you are getting new listeners every week. It's just none of them are coming back next week. You have a retention problem more than a growth problem. You're trying to fill a wicker basket with water, and you're trying to like turn up the faucet, and it's like, look, water level's not going anywhere because there's so much leakage in the bottom.
Yeah.
So that's level 2, is learning how to keep the listeners that you get. Right. So your question is, where are these people coming from? These entrepreneurs, they're sending emails to their email list. They're posting on social. They're doing all these things. And everyone looks, listens, Entrepreneur Money Stories. There's a crappy intro. I don't really know. And they never come back.
Yeah.
So level 2, we teach you how to have a great intro. Great story for this guy, for this one. Guy I worked with, name is Nate. His show is called Low Carb Hustle. That's a great premise, right? You know what we're doing here. We're trying to live a low carb lifestyle.
Yep.
He was doing everything under the sun to grow a show, man. He was spending money on ads. He was showing up on tons of podcasts. He was actually kind of crushing the social media game. He had great clips that were going out, but his show was stuck at 12,000 downloads per month. And he got to that point because he was like really just completely balls to the wall on growth tactics, but it was stuck. So I said, all right, let me take a look. I pressed an episode and it was like, you press play and it was, hey, what's up? It's your boy Nate here with my boy Juicy Cheeks. Juicy Cheeks, how was your week? And I'm like, okay, who's Juicy Cheeks? I don't care about Juicy Cheeks this week. What are we talking about today? So I was like, Nate, I want you to record this intro for your next episode. I wrote it out for him. I'm like, I want you to say problem, vision, solution. What problem is this episode going to solve? What's their life going to be like when it's solved? The solution is this episode. Stick around. He did that. It was a 60-second intro. All he did was change his intros. He didn't change his growth tactics at all. Within 3 months, his show went from 12,000 to 36,000 per month just from that change. And then 6 months later, he was at about 75,000 per month. So he was not losing listeners. He was repelling listeners because he didn't know how to keep. He could get the play, but he couldn't get people to stick around and actually get the value. So that's level 2, is keep the listeners that you get.
And level 1 is clear, unique premise.
Clear, unique premise. Level 2 is keep the listeners that you get. Usually at this point, again, these entrepreneurs, they understand generally getting traffic. So that's why they're so confounded that their show's not growing. We fix these 2 things, the numbers start to go up. Then we start to look at their growth tactics. And so the spark notes for part 3, for level 3, is don't promote, participate. Don't promote, participate. The 3 ways that I'm seeing right now, the ways that I'm seeing shows explode are, 1, ideally all 3, but one of 3 things. Number 1, the podcaster learns how to get organic reach on social media. Number 2, the podcaster does a podcast tour and shows up as a guest on other shows. It's the most efficient way to find other podcast listeners. Number 3 is YouTube. I'll admit I'm not as experienced with YouTube, so I'm just kind of getting into that right now.
Same.
So I can't give you any advice there, but I've seen tons of shows just explode, as you know, as just completely explode from YouTube. But what I can say is that podcast guesting is tried and true. We can talk about that. It's been talked about before. You know, it's just, you got to show up regularly on other shows. You know, I do have a process, which I'm happy to walk through. It's how I wound up here for identifying the shows to be a guest on. But for the social media piece real quick, the number one thing, the disconnect is people fire up social media and they try to use social media to promote their podcast episode. And you've seen these posts. It's the horrible headshot of the guest with new episode available now and like horrible graphics, episode number 125. And it's like, and it gets no reach, right? No likes, no engagement, nothing happens.
It's like someone has never taken any time at all to study how social media works for literally 2 seconds. It's crazy.
They haven't.
It's crazy.
At all, right? They're just like, I'm advertising my show. But all you got to do is teach them how it works, right? Like, it's just put stuff out that people like that social media post. Was that a good post? Did they get value? Were they entertained? Was it useful? And so it's just, instead of using.
Actually, can I chime in right there?
Please, you know, you have more experience with social than I do, so I'd love to know what you have to say.
I will say this. I used to genuinely believe that people, they were on social media to learn, to be educated. Nope. Like, people want one thing. They want to be entertained, right? Like, that is why we're on social media, right? And it's like, you go to the birthday party, right? And it's like, if you go to a birthday party and you hang out and you're the dude or the woman there that is trying to teach and do your presentation and educate people on blah, 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 right? You are nobody's friend and you will not be invited back, right? But if you're the cool, funny guy, right? One that people like, you're charming, you make people feel good, you listen, you ask good questions, like, you give people a good time, you'll be invited back every time. And then when you're like, hey, by the way, they will all follow you, right? And like, it's crazy to me. Like, when I study social, like, I'm a teacher, dude. I mean, you are too. Like, we love teaching, we love helping people, and like whatever, all the things. And it's like, podcasting, YouTube, perhaps, right? Like I said, I'm with you. I'm not a huge, I don't know it very well. Like, those are ways where you can educate, right? But like, Facebook, Instagram, like, look at Elon Musk, dude. He's the richest freaking dude in the entire world, right? Crazy influential. You go to him and it's just memes. And so, you know what I mean? Though,
That's a
like
great
it's
point. Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
And so,
It's just
like
jokes.
when you understand how the social media platforms work, it's like social media is not there to educate. Social media is there to get exposure, right?
Mm,
And then you rip them off as fast as you can, and then go educate them over there, right? But
totally.
if you want people to see eyeballs, be funny, be
Yeah.
engaging, be entertaining, right? Like make
Participate.
people don't look away. That exactly. Participate. Be
So,
in the
so
culture. Yeah. Yeah.
really, it's because I always say don't promote, participate. Sounds like what we're saying is don't promote, don't educate, participate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Be
it's funny you
part of
say
the
that.
culture. Be part of what's going on. Like do stuff that's relevant that people want to watch
Yep.
and they won't look away. It's why, I mean, regardless of your political beliefs, it's why Trump was so effective,
Yep.
right? Like in 2016, he
Yep.
was just like, you were just like, there's no way,
Yep.
right? Like it
One
was
of my
so funny. Yeah.
one of my former students, Brian Lubin, just put a story out this morning about this, where he's like, "Hey, everybody, if you're looking to grow your podcast on social media, stop trying." He's like, "My educational content reaches 1/20th. It's just when I'm in here, making videos that just comments on stuff, making jokes. That's where the reach comes, and then you send people later. So it totally checks out."
100%. 100%. Yeah. Continue.
All right, so 3 ways to grow the show right now in 2024 that I see working. Participate on social media, number 1. There's another client of mine who she joined to grow her entrepreneur show, wound up launching a side show with her sister, about, like, romantasy novels, and they got 1,000,000 downloads in 3 months just
Crazy.
from participating on TikTok. Like, Book Talk
Yeah.
just took them and, like, they quit their jobs. They're represented by Hugh Jackman's talent agency. They're on the Q Code network, just all because they hopped on TikTok, participated in the jokes and the memes about these books, and it just skyrocketed them. So just another
Yeah.
case study of that. Social media, podcast guesting, getting on the right shows. A lot of people get this wrong where they just send a gajillion pitches to, remember what I said, the vast majority of podcasts out there only have 250 downloads per episode. So they go on 50 shows, which, let's see, 50 times 250 that's 12,000 people, but still you can be way more leveraged. It tends
Right.
to not work. That's 50 shows over the course of a year.
Yep.
So it's about targeting the right shows that have your future listeners listening to them, and
Yes.
targeting shows that have an audience,
Yeah.
and then YouTube. So that's 3. Level 4, we already covered it. If you want to monetize, get your listeners to buy stuff that you get a cut of. That's it.
Interesting. Okay. Very helpful. So I have a question about the you and I both serve entrepreneurs, right? Like that's our customer. And I think that you and I offer a very different solution with a podcast, right? And I'm curious when you when you are talking to people about this concept of the podcast, right? I know that a lot of the people that come to you, or most of the people that come to you, they already have a podcast, so they're already bought in some capacity to doing that, right? Long term, is the goal of these entrepreneurs, or is the goal with your method, for that matter, is the goal to become a large show, to build a massive, essentially, podcast that happens to have a business on the back end of it, right? Like yes, that's how you monetize, whether that's an affiliate deal or it's your own offers or whatever, right? But the primary focus is let's grow the podcast, right? Or is the primary focus of the model to say, hey, listen, we have a business that we're trying to grow. The podcast is a vehicle and a tool. We are going to build the business. Podcast just happens to be the way that we do that, but like that still needs to be the focus. Primarily speaking, which would you say is
It's
your
less, yeah, it's not as much about I want to be famous. I want to have a huge. I mean, everybody does. Everyone's like, yeah, I want it to be as big as possible. But the
yeah,
real goal is it's more like some entrepreneurs they're like, they do ads and they're like, we need something, like, we're getting on calls and people have no idea who we are. So we need
yeah,
something to show what we know. Others just, a lot of them, because like I said, I only work with the folks who have already launched, just
yep,
because they've kind of been
smart,
through the first cycle, right? Of, hey, this is hard, and they still want to do it.
yep,
So they decided not to quit. Um, and so those folks usually have gotten some clients from their show, even though like they
yeah,
have 200 downloads an episode, and they're just like, I want to replicate this. And the third thing is, they want to just be known. They want to be known as the industry leader. They want to be known at, they want to be an influencer in their space
yeah.
for what we're talking about. So they want their audience to be bigger, but it's not about, let me just get the big, it's not just an attention game and let me just get as big and huge as I can.
And realistically speaking, the people that you're working with, like, do you think that your model is sustainable and scalable? As I mean, you and I both know the reality of the podcast industry, which is that it's not that big actually, right? Like
Totally.
it will, I think it's
So
got lots and
still,
lots to grow,
6 years
right?
in, still surprised at how not big it is.
Right. I think it's got a lot. I think it appears much larger than it is because a lot of people with a lot of followings happen to have them, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. But like realistically speaking, is this approach of focusing on the listener and building something, is this something that you think that any business owner in this space could do successfully? Or do you think that it is a point where, you know, if you're in the marketing space or the coaching space or whatever, you're going to run into competition to where it's going to be hard to stand out and get listeners?
So I hope there's a point where we all run into competition, but as it is now, there's very little. And so the way I see it is for the business owner who has the charisma to be a creator
Yeah.
and who wants to do this, like who wants to, because I get people who come to me and they're like, I just want you to do everything. Like, I
Yeah.
just want to show up for the interviews. And I'm like, there's plenty of
Uh,
other people who offer that.
Yep.
That is not me.
Yeah.
We're here
100%.
because you, the
Smart.
CEO, want to be the creator. You want to put the work into this. You want to refine. You want all these things, which there's going to be parts of it that suck, but you still want to do it. I'm like, you still in? Yeah. All right, let's rock and roll.
Yeah.
And usually it's not that hard to establish, to be number one in your niche,
Really.
because there's just so many people quit. There's just such a high barrier there's a low barrier of entry, but there's a high, I don't know what the word is, high barrier of nobody
That's
stays, right? Nobody
yeah. Yeah.
sticks around, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, it really isn't the hardest part in making someone number one is just getting them through the podcast ladder, getting them to make their premise more clear. Because a lot of people come to me and they have, they love their name, right? They like trademarked it. I'm like, dude, your name is not doing you any favors. So we got to get past that. We got to
Yeah.
teach them the skill of holding attention. Like, it's teaching them skills. That's the hardest part. But when it comes to the market, that's actually not the challenge.
Yeah. Okay. And that was going to be my next question, because that right there, man, I'm naive, or I was, still am probably in a lot of ways, right? Like I got into entrepreneurship thinking everybody wants to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into entrepreneurship being like, everybody, like if you're an entrepreneur, obviously you're good at teaching. Like obviously you're good on camera. Obviously you're like, duh, right?
Yeah.
Super not, right?
Not everyone.
And then I'm like,
Nope.
how do you make any money? And then I would meet all these rich people, like really, 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 really rich people. Like, and they were so terrible on camera, or so
Yeah.
terrible. Like I'm like, whoa, okay. So obviously I don't know anything about making money, right? Because they did it without it, right?
Yep.
And it's it is I think that the coaching industry, I'm a believer in the coaching industry. I'm a product of the coaching industry. I think the coaching industry is an overwhelmingly net positive. It bothers me how much people bash it, right? Like
Totally,
it's
man.
like,
You and me
what are we
both.
doing here, guys? Like,
You and me
you know,
both.
I'm a product of it for sure. At the same time, I don't think most people are qualified to, or most people are cut out to be coaches, not because they don't have good information, but because simply they don't know how to teach.
It's a
right?
skill. They don't know the skill of coaching. Yeah.
They
Or
don't
teaching.
understand how to shift belief. They don't, right? And I feel like podcasting is probably a similar game. So how do you particularly overcome that? Or like how have you solved that issue?
Qualification.
Yeah.
I like there. I mean, I'm very fortunate that the company's done well enough, and I've just learned enough where we disqualify folks. Like if I'm talking with an entrepreneur and it's just, I mean, I'm talking with them on a Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
And how are they articulating what they want, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's so just through the whole process, I also qualify on like, what are they talking about? What are their qualifications? Like, is this somebody that I think people are going to want to learn from?
Yeah.
It's kind of like in the music industry, like, yeah, anybody can pay to get a record produced, but like the best
Yeah.
producers are probably going to like see if you're a good musician before they work
Right.
with you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's a decent amount of that. But what I usually find is for my best clients, I'll meet with them and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, this person just 100% needs the skills. They've got the charisma, they've got the sort of natural stuff,
Yeah.
and they're coachable as well. So it's not necessarily. I have stopped trying to solve for that because it's just something that.
And maybe I think I asked the question poorly there. Let me reframe the question, which is, what are the principles and skills that one must master, right? Like, what are the things where you're like, hey, these are the things, right, that make you, like, for example, I think that it's very difficult to be a good coach if you do not know how to tell stories, right? Like stories are so critical in shifting belief, right? So like what are the qualifications, the principles, or the skills that you think makes a successful podcaster?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind was storytelling, 100%. Second is really sales, right? So, and the sub skill within that is being able to anticipate and handle objections. So tell the story in a way that handles objections that people have, because when you're teaching on via audio and you're telling somebody something, they have objections in their head, and you're just like, I know what you're thinking. That's not going to work for me because this. Well, blah, blah, let me tell you a story. Blah blah blah. So sales is really the one thing where it's like, if you have success being in sales, you're in a good spot to
Yeah.
be a content creator, because content really is sales, right? You're selling folks on
Yep.
the information that you're telling them, or the stories, or why things are important, or why your opinion is right, or whatever. So, so really it's storytelling, it's different sales stuff. And then I don't know how to articulate. This is a great question, by the way, dude. I've never been asked that one. Like conciseness. I don't know, like being
Yeah.
able
Yeah.
to just like the charisma of being able to deliver stuff like that on the fly, right? Which
Yeah.
I guess might fall under storytelling, but just being
Yeah, but I think it's
a
different.
good communicator,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the good thing is, a lot of those things are things that are kind of inherently required to be a good CEO, right? Because
Yeah.
you are selling your customers, your clients, you're selling your employees, you're telling stories, you're getting buy-in, all those different things. And then the fourth thing is just like some sort of specific knowledge, right? Some sort of
Yeah.
um, technical thing that you can teach people.
Makes sense. I'd like to compare models. I'd like to
Yeah.
I have some questions. But before I do that, what haven't I asked you that is gold?
So I'll just real quick give you the algorithm for how I
Yep.
find the shows. So basically,
And this is you finding shows that you're going to reach out to come on.
this is how I got here where I am right now. This is how I
Yep.
got on the show.
Perfect. Yep.
So yes, basically what I do and what we do for our folks and what I teach people is most podcasts have guests. Most of those guests, your podcast is not the only podcast that they've been on.
Yep.
So what I say is, look, podcaster, you've come to me, you've done 50 episodes. Who are your top 10 guests that you've had? Now let's go research all the shows that they have already been on, because that person has already done the work of finding and vetting shows. So we research. So what brought me to you is my mentor, Ravi Abuvala. I think you had Ravi on your show, right?
I did have Robbie on my show.
You
Yeah.
did. So
He
Ravi's my
is
mentor.
an interesting character, by the way. Like he's
He is.
fascinating to watch.
He sidebar, he got me into the coaching world because he was a friend of a friend before he got into the coaching world, and we just like met. We went to Nashville for the solar eclipse in 2017, hung out for a weekend, followed each other on Instagram, and then he started like sharing on Instagram all the stuff that he was doing. And then eventually I was like, dude, you got to teach me what you're learning here. So he taught me, and that's how I got here, right, in the online coaching space.
Amazing.
So cool. So I said, all right, what other shows has Ravi been on? Because he's also very meticulous. So I'm like, I said, team, go find these 10 people. Ravi was one of them. And then we go through the results, hear all the shows that these people have been on, that have been on my show, the shows that they've been on in the past 18 months that are also still publishing. And then you kind of do some filtering. You can use tools like Raphonic or Listen Notes, which are like podcast database aggregators, to get a sense of how many listeners. Raphonic, highly recommend it. Those
what was the other one?
Listen Notes, all one word, Listen Notes. Basically, both of those websites will tell you a guess on how many downloads a podcast has. Another weird quirk about podcasting is that it's all completely private, right?
Yeah.
So you can't tell. So they like just through different online things that are available, they'll make a best guess. And so what I just filter all the shows that are not at a certain level. And then usually each guest that I've had on my show brings me like 10 to 30 other podcasts. And all the time I'm like, how have I not heard of this show? Like, what the heck? How did I not hear of Josh?
Yeah.
And then you reach out, and here's the key. You don't pitch yourself. You reach out and you say, hey, I found you because we both had Ravi Abuvala on our show. Just curious, how do you like to receive guest pitches? That question, because most people just send their pitch. Here's, I'm a billionaire. I've rags to riches. I want to share my story with your audience.
You and everybody else.
Puke.
Yeah.
But if instead you say, hey, we had the same guests, so I'm an actual person, right? How do you like to receive guest pitches? There's a far higher response rate. You get a 20 to 40% response rate on that message compared to a cold pitch, which gets like hopefully a 1% response rate.
Yeah.
Starts the conversation. Hey, sometimes it's, oh, you're in the right place, send the pitch here. Other times it's, hey, fill out this form. Other time, so you start the conversation, send the pitch. And then the other key is you don't pitch yourself, you pitch the topic. So it's like, hey, well, I think for me, instead of saying, I would love to tell my story of how I went from software developer to blah, 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 I would say, hey, would love to talk on your show about how the 4 things podcasters need to get right in order to grow and monetize. So that's the last thing, is just that algorithm. Every single time you feature a guest on the show, it unlocks 25 more shows that you can go be a guest on, and just do that. Just like everybody has a system for being consistent publishing episodes, podcasters are very good. I got to be consistent. I can't miss a week. You want to be consistent with guesting as well.
Interesting. Okay. That's helpful. That was good. Okay. So this is great stuff, by the way.
I mean, dude, I'm having a blast, man.
I've talked to a lot of podcasters, a lot of people that teach it. And I'm like, y'all suck, right? Like you don't, you know your stuff, which is very.
Oh, thanks, brother.
Speaks highly of you. So,
means a lot.
Little context. I'd like to like genuinely from a place of just like, let's compare these things, because I'm curious, right? Because I think they solve different, like my model solves a different problem than yours, even though maybe they both end up in clients, right? It's a very different approach, right? So I started podcasting, I don't know, 4 years ago, whatever it was. And I started with solo episodes, and then it was like, okay, let me go. And actually why I started was I'm broke and I can't afford $50,000 masterminds. So why don't I go and like interview smart people and ask them questions? So like legit though, like not just like for good content. Like I'm just like, I don't know. Right. And I got to get around these people. I'm broke. I got no special talents. Right. And what I found for me was like I did not focus on downloads, right? I didn't care. I looked, but like I legitimately just didn't really care, because I'm like, all I've got to do is I've got to get in front of the right people, right? And so I created a show that I thought was interesting. I modeled it after Joe Rogan, a little bit of impact theory, right? Blah, blah, blah.
Nice.
And I started interviewing, people, and I started asking good questions, and I was like, whatever topics they want to talk about, I would just like search their profile, right? And be like, they like to talk about this stuff. This meaningful. Yo, I've got a show where we have these important conversations. You want to come on, right? And started interviewing successful people. And one day I interviewed a guy by the name of Brad, and he, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars in real estate, right? He and I have become really good friends now. And I've literally seen people in his DMs offering him $15,000 for coaching, and he just ignores it because he doesn't have the time. Like just busy dude, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Like probably the smartest human being I've ever met. And he came on my show. Someone, he saw that one of his buddies was on the show, and whatever. Next thing you know, he's on the show. We talk for 2 hours, and we get done. And at the time, like I'm selling marketing services, right? Like that was my gig, social media marketing, things like that, $5,000, right? And we get done, and he's like, dude, that was awesome, right? Like, I really like you, right? Like, tell me a little bit more about what you do. And so I told him, and he's like, hey, I need that. Like, I'd be interested in hiring you. Can you send me over a proposal? I need it by tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, tomorrow. Like, like the first thought was freak out. You want to hire me? Amazing. And then it's like freak out. Oh my gosh. Like I'm used to big, long marketing funnels, right?
Totally.
And price drop, all the things.
Yeah.
And so I sent him over a proposal, and I was like, if this guy says yes, then I'm going to have to like stop everything to make sure that I can deliver. And there's no way in my mind I thought he was going to say yes. Right. And so I just wrote $30,000 and I sent it over to him. And then like 2 days later, he's like, sounds great. Right. Like we're cool. And then a week later, there's $30,000. And I'm like,
right.
The moments in your life where you're like, what the frick just happened? I don't know what happened,
moments.
but like, I got to do more of that. Right. Like
exactly. This can't be right. Right.
Can't be right. Exactly. And so it was kind of at that moment for me where I was like, wait a second. The podcast method, the traditional podcast method didn't seem to work in my head for entrepreneurs. The idea of selling to sponsorships, like sponsors, like that just is broken, right?
Yep.
Like we're not big enough to sell to sponsors. And how most people that bring on, I wanted interviews, like I wanted to talk to people, right? Most people are like, I'm a marketer, so I'm going to start a marketing show and I'm going to bring on marketing experts. And I'm like, you're basically just telling your whole audience to go buy from your competition, right?
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. And like my purpose of a show was just to learn. And all of a sudden now I've got $30,000 in my lap, right? And so I'm like, okay, I should probably do more of this. And so I can't even emphasize enough how much I did not focus on the listener. Like, cause I would look at Joe Rogan and I'm like, that dude never looks at the camera. He never
Yep.
talks to the listener. It's never about like all he's doing is trying to create a really good conversation. And like, that's all I did. And I just was like, how do I create a better conversation? Better conversation, better conversation. And like, dude, I mean, Russell Brunson reached out to me and asked to come on the show.
Yep.
And we're really good friends now. Like I ended up flying out to ClickFunnels HQ. He streamed it to his entire platform. We went for 3.5 hours. We talked about Atlas Shrugged, right? I mean, now I spoke on stage at FHL from it. And so my approach to podcast has always been that the saying like your network is your net worth, right?
Totally.
Relationships are the currency of the wealthy, right? It's like relationships have been the thing that have changed my life, not following. And Grown and managed, 7 million followers, like
Yep.
on social. Those are the ones that changed my life. Those are the ones that paid $30, $50, $100,000, right? My biggest contract ever is $250,000 from a Google Doc and a podcast interview, right? And so my approach with the Gold Mike method has always been, if you just focus on creating the best possible experience for the guest, number one, they will say yes because like they're going to say yes to something they want to talk about anyway. And number two, like we grew that to 1.5 million downloads all organically, right? Like,
Yep.
and I never focused on the guest. I mean,
Yep.
on the listener, right? And so my approach has been, I use a podcast as a networking tool, not as an audience building tool. And clearly it works both ways, right?
Yeah, 100%.
From your perspective, what would be the key differences, or I don't even know if I have a question. Like, I guess just what are your thoughts on the differences between the two of them? And I have more specific questions, but like, let's start there.
I mean, I think that your show, you didn't focus it as a audience building tool, but it did that, right?
It did.
Like
100%
right?
it did. Yeah.
And the opposite is true as well. Like if you are launching the show as an audience building tool, it also supercharges your freaking network when you have guests. And same thing here. Like, I mean, I've gotten to know huge creators because
Yeah.
they're on my show. Then they're like, oh, you should
Right.
come on mine. And then they're like, so that's just how it works. So you get the benefits in both cases. It's just, which one are you optimizing for? Which one are you optimizing for? Like, are you
Yeah.
optimizing? Because I come across, it's not as common, but I do come across people who they come through my funnel and they're like, I don't care at all about how many listeners I have. I just want to interview people and then have some of the people hire for me. I'm like, that's awesome. That's not what we do here, but hell yeah, man.
Yeah.
Like go for it. And I know people who have huge businesses
Yeah.
do it that way. It's just, I go for the other side of it. And what I'd say is like, you're absolutely right. The relationships thing, like it's all about relationships. I think having a podcast, I mean, think about the relationship that you have with Joe Rogan, right? Think about how much you've heard that dude's voice and how much you know like
Yeah.
him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So podcasting, you get the relationship with the guest for sure. And it's like totally
Yeah.
supercharged, especially if it's in person, but you're also just creating thousands, hundreds of thousands of relationships at scale, totally leveraged as well. You don't know them, but they
Yeah.
know you and they want to buy from you.
One is I think it's interesting when you were like, 50% or whatever it was that you do is more solo episodes, right? Because I'm like, that's interesting. I'd like to maybe explore that because I'm like, I don't do so. I mean, every now and then, like I have just as we've been getting ready to launch this one, kind of prepping people and putting some videos out on YouTube and stuff. I used to do a lot of Facebook Lives and things like that, right? But in our program, like when I bring people in, we've surveyed all of them and asked them, what is the number one objective of your show? Like of this, what's your number one objective here? And the question I asked them is, do you want a super successful show with, you make 10 or 25,000 bucks? Or if you could make 100 grand and you literally had no show, but like you made 100 grand, like which one would you rather choose? And like every one of them, 100%, it's shocking. It's probably the only 100% poll that I've ever done. Right. And it's not like on like two people, right? Like I think 60 or 70 of them, right?
100%
of them are like, want to make money, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, these people pay $25,000, right? And their number one objective is sales. And so to me, like the Golden Mike method, which is the name of my framework, right? That our process is a sales process more so than it is a podcast process. And it sounds like it just happens, or it happens to use a podcast, right? It sounds like yours is a podcast process that also happens to bring in sales. Would
I would
that be
say
an accurate
I would
assumption or
say
no?
yours is a sales process. Mine is a marketing process. I think that's the
Mm,
difference,
okay. All right. I like that. All right.
right? Like yours is sales forward and it brings you marketing. Mine is
Yeah.
marketing forward and it brings me sales.
Yeah.
Because I still have to have a sales process, right? Like
Right.
we still apply, we still book a call, like all that stuff. It's still
Yeah.
required. But the and like I have would love to help with ads at any point. Let me know because 2022, like I did
With ads?
1.5 with ads. Yeah, 1.5
Mm.
million in 2022. I've since descaled a little bit just because things actually they scaled too much, got a little out of my control, so I've had to slow
I
down a
get
little
it.
bit.
Yep.
Um, but 2022, man, everybody, it's funny. Every podcast, anybody who was podcasting in 2022 saw my ads because they worked. They were great. And shoot, what did
Educational
I?
ads or for to grow the podcast?
No, for a funnel to grow so basically it was an ad to a masterclass teaching basically the podcast ladder. And man, I totally forgot why. Oh, um, basically what it served though, it not a single person. Okay, that's actually not true. A handful of people did, but most people saw the ad, went through the funnel, didn't buy right away, but then listened to the show every single week and then eventually bought.
Okay,
Some
so
bought right
that
away.
right there, like that is my not beef. That is my observation with your model. And like, keep in mind, I'm not bashing, right? I'm just
No,
like
dude, yeah,
coming
you're
from
good,
this.
man.
Like, okay.
You're good.
Is
Let's
I
rock.
go and I'm like, I believe that a podcast is one of the most, if not the most effective nurturing tools when it comes to educational content, like you're talking about, when it comes to whatever, like, like the model where you're focused on the listener, right? But I did, like, whenever we would promote stuff directly to the podcast, it did not convert very well. Like, it just didn't. And the thing that always saved is not the right word. The thing that was required to make sales to the listener, there was always a third party or a third thing, which was like the masterclass, right? So like if I go and run a 5-day challenge, which I love running 5-day challenges, right? We actually just wrap one up, right? And I sold that for years to many people. I love them, and webinar, whatever. The people that would go through there, the people that bought right away were always the people that had listened to the podcast, right? For sure, right? Like they'd consumed and nurtured or whatever, right? And the people that didn't buy, exactly what you said, then they went and listened to the podcast, and then the next
Yep.
go around they would.
Yep.
However, it still required that third party tool, right? Like it still required that element. So my thing is when I would teach people how to do 5-day challenges or teach people how to do webinars, you think podcasting is hard to teach? Oh my freaking gosh. Like teaching someone to pitch it live in front of, a 5-day challenge is, I mean,
I bet.
you're basically asking them to perform in the NBA, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, right? So to me, like there was this barrier where I'm like, I'm asking them to have to go learn another skill over here. How do I cut that out to where I can go directly to the sale, right? To where now they don't have to perform that. So with the to the listener model, how do you actually convert them into a buyer? When you say 2 to 7% of our buyers, is it direct to book a call? Is there a masterclass involved? What does that
Email.
look like? Email.
Email,
Okay.
100%. So I'm currently, I haven't published it yet, but I'm currently kind of working on a framework I call the content-driven business. And
Okay.
the idea is that it has 4 pieces: long form, which I call a podcast; short form, so like we said, participate on social; email; and a core offer. And while I used to say like, oh, you can totally do a podcast alone, right? Oh, you need that other thing. The thing is, so I am absolutely not, I agree with you. I'm not, like, a podcast by itself, very difficult to do, like almost
Yeah.
impossible, because for a number of reasons. One of them being people listen to podcasts while they're doing something else. So like you might have the best, most juiciest call to action ever on your show, but if they're driving, what are they going to do? Pull over and like go
And
buy your thing?
that's my issue right there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
So,
continue. Yeah.
so it's an ecosystem. And what's also true is that, like we said before, 10 to 20% of your audience is not going to tune in on a regular basis, but that doesn't, like, you still want to have other stuff that you're doing. You still want to be participating on social media, and you still want to be emailing. Emailing to this day is just king, in my opinion, when it comes to sales. Let me just give you a brief, how I learned this. 4 years
Yeah.
with the business. The first 4 months of Grow the Show, the podcast didn't exist. It was just, I'm going to launch a coaching program. I started working with Ravi Abuvala. He taught me how to do outbound. There was a period of time, July through October, where I was on 6 to 12 discovery calls a day. I had a VA that was just cranking out cold email and LinkedIn. And I was getting all these discovery calls. I think 4 people bought my 3K at the time thing. And it was brutal, man. I was like getting tested for sleep apnea because I was so stressed out. Turned out I was just stressed. And then my girlfriend one night was like, why don't you launch a podcast about podcasting? Like, why don't you do what you're trying to teach other people how to do? I was like, brilliant. Launch a show in October. And then by December, I did 20K. February, I did 40K. Like that, like the nurturing piece of the podcast was where people were like, whoa, this guy does know what he's talking about. Holy crap, let me work with him. As compared to just like, bam, discovery to sale, which never worked. Then so 20K in December. The following month, I learned how to do Facebook ads for the first time. And that's when I learned the power of how ads can just bring you traffic. If you've got a mechanism, it's crazy. So started doing Facebook ads 2021 in February, did 40K, 40K, 40K. And then it was stuck between 40 and 50K for a whole year. And then in January, February of 2022, I changed one thing about my business. I had a team of 3, I had a sales rep, I had a podcast manager and an operations person and me. Same offer, same price, 50K a month. I just started emailing my list twice a week. And went to 100 per month.
For sure.
And stayed there, doubled, right? So that's when I was like, whoa, okay, email, a huge thing. People buy from email, like they book times, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Okay, so can I agree with you. I'm like genuinely, like I actually agree that like trying to do any one specific thing standalone can be very difficult, right? It's rare that one can work, right? Business owner to business owner, coach to coach for a second. In your program though, like how much is your offer? Your main one?
We're right now, the mastermind's pre-launching at 15K.
Oh, okay. That's right. You have a mastermind now. So that's a little bit different because it's a mastermind.
But the main offer that I've been doing for 3 years was 10K.
Okay. So 10K, like in that offer, are you also teaching email marketing and also teaching social media and also teaching ads?
Not ads, a little bit of email marketing, just like a workshop here and there, which I like, there's like a 30-minute thing. I'm like, start doing this with your email. And usually they'll get a bunch of clients that pays for the program. And then great. Now they're happy because it's paid off. Now let's spend a year and grow your show. Right. So, but the main meat of my program, we do talk a lot about social media just because it's such the paradigm shift, right? Such a big thing. The podcast guesting, the meat of my stuff though is making a premise that's clear. And here's how to be a good podcaster and put out great episodes. Yeah.
So the issue that I ran into as a coach, and perhaps maybe, I don't know, maybe me just trying to rig a game that I can, exponentially win at is a little bit of this, but is that I found it very difficult to, like, I could get let's take the podcast thing, for example. I could have my podcast thing so good dialed in, like this is amazing. But if the people did not also do these other things or have these other things or do these things well, the effectiveness of the piece that I taught went way down because they weren't executing on the other things, which I wasn't an expert. Like I didn't teach them how to do those things anyway. Does that make sense?
Totally. Which is, I had to solve that through qualification. So with time,
you solved it.
With time, I said, look, I'm only taking in with this high ticket thing, which is why I've created a front end offer thing, because there's tons of solopreneurs and side hustlers who, if they get access to what I teach, their show will grow. They're thrilled. They're like, yes, awesome. But to have a high ticket thing that drives 10x value for what they paid me, I was like, if I've just come across all these entrepreneurs who the missing piece is their podcast is not good. Like they haven't even, like they have all these other pieces. They're just not, it's just not optimized. So that's how I solved it. It's qualification.
Got it. Okay. Because like the whole premise of the Golden Mike method is you literally don't need anything else as long as you have an offer. Like that's it. That's all you got to. Yeah. If you have a skill set that you have sold for money and for at least, $5,000 and you've gotten someone a result, you don't need an audience. You don't need an email list. You need nothing else. And it's like, we can go direct to create a good angle of the show, get in front of the right people, Google Doc the pitch, and you're done. Right. And so they're two very different models. and they solve different problems. But I think, man, the difference between a marketing system and a sales system, I think, was a
Yeah.
key takeaway.
And
Yeah.
like the qualification piece, just to highlight, is like
Yeah.
the folks on the front end with the lower ticket thing that's gonna be $99 a month or 1,000 for a year, just, basically DIY. Again, like, they don't need to have all those systems already built out.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
training will help them build each thing, and I'm gonna be putting in more training about how to build an email list
No,
and all
I
those
get it.
different
Yeah.
things, right? But
Yeah.
the back end, it's like, no, in order for you to buy this thing, it's not gonna be valuable for you unless we already have a couple other pieces in place.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. That's good. That's good. Dude, we're already like 15 minutes until you're cut off. So I want to shift gears to kind of just kind of start to bring this to a close here. Tell me a little bit more about you. Like, what's life
Sure.
look like outside of business? What do you like? What's Kevin like?
Yeah. So I'm a big time raver. I love electronic music. So I go to a lot of festivals. I moved
Nice.
to Miami in 2022. My girlfriend Emily and I moved here just because the business started taking off, and I had a lot of, as I call it, habit baggage back in Philly. So a lot of people are like, "You were the Philly guy and you left Philly. What the heck?" I'm like, "Look, I love Philly. I'm going to be back."
Yeah,
But I needed
I
to,
get it.
needed to get out, reset life a little bit, establish some habits. I mean, like a lot of people in entrepreneur space, big into personal development. When I was 16, I weighed 300 pounds. So like crazy weight loss journey.
Mm,
And I mean, at
congratulations.
this point, thanks, man. At this point, life, I'm in a season of quiet other than the festivals. Like we take a weekend, we go all in, stay up all night, those
You
type
going
of
to
things.
Bonnaroo?
We went to Bonnaroo last year.
Yeah.
The lineup just came out, the like daily lineup, and it's intriguing as hell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
we always every year we're like, we're not going, and then the lineup comes out, we're like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but we just did Ultra 2 weeks ago. So like,
Oh, nice. Nice.
2 weeks after a fest, we're always like, we got to dial here. But then 3
Yeah.
weeks later, we're like, let's do it again. It's the same
Yeah.
cycle
Yeah.
every single time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've also like, I've been a total nerd optimizing like my festival, like just like caffeine. I don't really do drugs. So like getting the sleep time, just so optimized how to do festivals without it just like ruining everything else.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I mean, life is pretty quiet right now. We like just hang out with people in Miami. Emily's a big time raver shuffler. Like, so we've got tons of those types of friends in Miami, but, dude, I focus the vast majority of my time at this moment on this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. What's the future look like? The next 3, 5, 10 years? What are you building?
Yeah. So next 3 to 5 years, I'm continuing to help people grow their podcasts. Like I'm a big believer in, I want to kind of quote unquote see this thing through. I don't know what that means fully. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if
I
that's
get it.
an
Yep.
exit or an acquisition, but I feel like I'll know. And then something that I've learned just through studying how people have grown their audiences is that a lot of the biggest creators did something really specific for a time, crushed
Yep.
that thing, and then moved into something sort of more broad. So like Lewis Howes, a lot of people don't know this. Do you know what he did before School of Greatness?
I don't.
5
think you're.
years, he was the grow your LinkedIn guy. Just that was it.
I remember he had a personal branding course, but I didn't know it was LinkedIn.
Yeah, and like he just like did a webinar, sold a LinkedIn growth course, made 5 million, eventually sold that, used all of the proceeds of that sale to start School of Greatness. Pat Flynn was architecture. Joe Rogan was the Fear Factor guy for 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
so what I've learned is that because I, like most entrepreneurs, most creators, have designs to talk more broadly about things, about lives, philosophy. I'd love to talk about weight loss, about all these things. But the way I see it is, I think people need to you need to be the go-to person for one thing before people will come to you for everything. And I see a lot of folks that I work with that are like, I want to talk about everything. I'm like, let's just talk about this one thing for a little bit.
Yeah.
You can win that and then level up to the next pond. So
Yeah.
that's just kind of the loose structure that I see moving forward.
Yeah.
At some point, I'll probably start a different show that's more broad and maybe get some of the big wigs on it. But that's where I'm headed.
Are you, if you had to guess down the like big picture, 10, 20 years, are you more of a entrepreneur and I'm going to build businesses and use creative podcast outlets or whatever to build business? Or are you more of a creator and like you're going to be much more focused on, say, a podcast or a creative outlet and just use entrepreneurship to structure it?
I think the latter. I think more of like, because when I think like, whose life do I want? Based on what I know of it, obviously.
Yeah.
I gravitate towards authors.
Yeah.
Tim Ferriss,
Really?
Ryan
Interesting,
Holiday. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ryan Holiday, he was the like viral marketing guy, and then he went into stoicism.
Yeah.
So like that's what I think now. I also thought a lot of different stuff about my life 6 years ago, so who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows where it's gonna go, but
I'm with you there. And I actually kind of could see that vibe, that energy from you too with the author piece.
Yeah.
Ryan Holiday, James Clear, things of that
Yeah.
nature. Part of me is like, man, I wish I could be like that, but I'm like, I have too many opinions and I like to cause controversy too much, right?
Nice.
So like I'm big in, I say philosophy, but honestly, it's probably more religion. And studying and having like conversations about like that. I used to be very, very big into politics. 2020, like
Mm.
I was the height of, I mean, in the ClickFunnels world, and that I don't think there was a single person that received more attention and criticism about like in the whole space than I did, right? Like that tens of
Yeah.
thousands of comments, right, of on those things. But like I just have gotten to the point where I don't care,
Yeah.
right, about politics that much anymore. I'm like, oh, cool. So we're gonna burn, and we're gonna burn either this way or we're gonna burn that way.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. Right. Right.
So then I'm like, I found crypto, pieced out of politics, and like a big in Bitcoin, big, big, big in crypto. And then also just like Jordan Peterson, right? Like
Yeah.
those types of conversations, like wrestling with God and philosophy and things of that nature. And I think you hit the nail on the head when it's like the Lewis Howes or whatever. It's like you go and you make your mark with one thing. Make your $5 million, right? Have your exit, right? Get your 3, 4, 5 million under your belt. Then go do whatever you want to build as your passion project because you can do it, right? You've got the credibility, you've got the money. I think that was a really, really solid statement there for sure. So,
Thanks, man.
yeah,
It's funny. I'm very not confrontational. So like in this world that's becoming more and more so, I'm like at first I was like, man, I'm uncomfortable with it. And I'm learning to, I'm
yeah,
learning to get better at it. But I also like more recently I've been like, maybe that's not a bad thing. And
yep,
I think that's what brings me more to the author way where it's like Guy Raz, who is the guy who got me into podcasting. He's the host of How I Built This. I saw him speak at a conference and he said like the whole purpose of that show. Have you ever heard How I Built This?
yeah, yep,
Okay. So he said the whole purpose of that show, he's like, what everybody's talking, most people are talking about stuff that are on the surface and think like a storm, like on the ocean during a
yeah,
hurricane, right? It's just choppy. And that's what everything's talking about right now. Everyone's fighting on everything. But if you go down just like 5 feet, it's
yeah,
completely calm. And you
yeah,
have no idea that there was a storm going on. And
yeah.
that's what's really intriguing to me. So I think I might lean into that. I don't know,
Yeah,
because
I think you might be onto something there too. And I think the thing that with controversy is I like to know what the truth is, right?
yeah,
I don't care about people's opinions so much as I want to know the truth. And like people, I think my biggest correction I think from 2020 and the place that I've grown is I was not intentionally trying to be controversial or divisive. Like it was not intentional, right? But people would like I'd state an opinion about something and then people would blow it up and I'm like, "Well then let's hear your opinion." And then they
yeah,
would,
yeah, yeah,
and then it was, spiral. And so I think there's ways to do it. The reason I like controversy is not because I like controversy, but because I'm like, okay, if I state something, then I'm going to get feedback, right? Like I
totally.
want to know if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll adjust. But if I'm not
Yeah,
wrong, I'm going to double down. I'm going to prove to you
yeah.
why I'm not wrong, right? I don't care if I am, right? And so anyway, I know we kind of got to bring this to a close and we got a couple rapid fire questions, but before we
Oh,
do
cool.
that, thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you,
This was
man.
fun. This was good. We'll have to do it again.
I would love to.
That round 2 of this because as you develop more, as I develop more with this, we'll have to compare what's working,
Yeah.
what's not working. And this was, I must admit, this was much more educational and much more much more fun than I thought it was going to be. Right? I was like, oh,
Awesome, dude.
podcasting person. Like I was like, we'll give it a shot. But
Yeah.
it was awesome. It
Well,
was
I
awesome. So I
appreciate the
appreciate you coming
chance,
on.
dude. Yeah, me too.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so basically the Grow the Show podcast. So you're hearing my voice in a podcast app right now. Number one thing to do if you're a podcaster looking to grow, look up, just type Grow the Show, it'll come up. Same thing if you want to basically hear me go through the podcast ladder in more detail, you go to growtheshow.com/masterclass, it'll learn. But if you want to talk more philosophy stuff, debate maybe, teach me how to, debate without being uncomfortable. Instagram is where I am most active. So at Kevin Chemidlin. I'll
Sweet.
maybe you can put it in the show notes because they're not going to
Yeah,
know how
no,
to
we
spell
will.
shit.
We'll link those both down in the show notes there. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Go and check him out. To wrap up, we always do a couple fun rapid fire questions and then end with a deep, meaningful question. So
Hell
you
yeah.
ready for some rapid fire?
Let's go.
Perfect. First question: what is one bucket list item that you have not yet accomplished?
I want to go to the Super Bowl.
Ooh, who's your team?
Eagles.
Oh no, bro!
I'm
I'm
from
a
Philly. What do you?
that's fair. That's fair. I'm a Tom Brady fan, so therefore I'm a Patriots
Okay.
fan, right? So I got
Nice,
some.
nice.
Man, we lost to 2 teams, and you're one of them. That sucks. All right, it's good. What's one show that, or I mean, sorry, what's one book that you believe everybody should read?
Ooh. Essentialism. Greg McEwen.
All right, essentialism. Who's one person that you want to meet in person, like it before you die?
Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Deep, meaningful. I want you to imagine go to the end of your life, you're on your deathbed, and every person that you've been called to serve. So not every person that you've touched, right? But like every person that's your person, the person that you were called to serve. They forget everything you've ever taught them. However, you get to leave them with one final message that they will just believe at face value. Like 100% they will believe and act upon it, no questions asked. What's the message?
I love this. This is the SAT question at the end where you think you're done, but it's like a 6-page essay.
Yeah, right. Right.
One message to get everybody on the deathbed. I think I'm trying to think about how to phrase it. What comes to mind is you have more power than you think.
Mm.
You have more power than you think.
Good.
And I don't mean power like in a power sense, maybe.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like you have more. You can do it. Like you can change your life. Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
you have the power to change things.
Yeah, that's good. And it's funny, I hired a mindset coach that really helped me with identity and a lot of like things. And when I would do my affirmations in the morning mirror, because I was going through some stuff at the time,
Sure.
like the 4 things, the number one thing was, I'm Josh Forti. I'm powerful, right? I'm powerful. I'm influential. I'm wealthy. I'm free. And I'm like, the reason powerful was number one is because if I don't have power, I can't move, right? I can't do anything, right?
100%.
So that's good. That's good. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again. And guys, we'll end it with that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you on the next show.